Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain. We look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see what we can learn from them. On this microfiche time capsule, we are looking back at the Biographical Encyclopedia, Volume 1, and this article is entitled Richards, Willard. So, Willard Richards, what do we know about him? I know a little bit about him. He was in the first presidency with Brigham Young, and for a relatively brief time. He was there at the Martyrdom. He didn't get hurt at all. He was stuck behind a door. And in my opinion, he probably saved John Taylor's life that day, because John Taylor was the only one still alive in the room. There was Joseph Smith, Hiram Smith, John Taylor, and Willard Richards in that room. Willard Richards was not injured at all. He came out from behind the door and he looked at all the other people who had been shot multiple times. Joseph and Hiram were dead. There was nothing he could do for them. But John Taylor was not. He was still alive. And in my opinion, I think Willard Richards saved his life. So, we'll see if they mention that. People make a big deal about the bullet hitting his watch, yeah, and having it be stopped by the watch, which obviously is a miracle. It is something that's amazing, but it's not the reason he lived through it, in my opinion. I think that Willard Richards helped him to stop from bleeding to death. That is my opinion. Anyway. We'll see if his article agrees with me or not. But, yeah. So let's take a look at what is written about him. I don't know very much about his life before he met the church. So, and I'm not sure about his age when he died, but I do know that he did not become terribly old. Let's take a look at what the article says. Richards, Willard, second counselor to President Brigham Young from 1847 to 1854, was the son of Joseph and Rhoda Richards, and was born June 24, 1804, in Hopkinton, Middlesex County, Massachusetts. And from the religious teachings of his parents, he was the subject of religious impressions from his early childhood, although careless and indifferent in his external deportment. Okay, so he found it interesting, but he didn't actually say his prayers. Is that what I'm getting from that? At the age of 10 years, he removed with his father's family to Richmond, Massachusetts, where he witnessed several sectarian revivals and offered himself to the Congregational Church at that place at the age of 17, having previously passed the painful ordeal of conviction and conversion, even to the belief that he had committed the unpardonable sin. What? But the total disregard of that church to his request for admission led him to a more thorough investigation of the principles of religion, when he became convinced that the sects were all wrong, and that God had no church on the earth, but that he would soon have a church whose creed would be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God, yeah? From that time he kept himself aloof from sectarian influence, boldly declaring his belief to all who wished to learn his views, until the summer of 1835, when, while in the practice of medicine near Boston, the Book of Mormon, which President Brigham Young had left with his cousin Lucius Parker at Southborough, accidentally and providentially fell in his way. This was the first he had seen or heard of the Latter-day Saints, except the scurrilous records of the public prints, which amounted to nothing more than a boy named Joe Smith, somewhere out west, had found a gold Bible. Yeah, that's very thorough. He opened the book without regard to place and totally ignorant of its design and contents, and before reading half a page declared that God or the devil has had a hand in that book, for man never wrote it. He read it twice through in about 10 days, and so firm was his conviction of the truth that he immediately commenced settling his accounts, selling his medicine, and freeing himself from every encumbrance that he might go to Kirtland, Ohio, 700 miles west, the nearest point he could hear of a saint, and give the work a thorough investigation, firmly believing that if the doctrine was true, God had some greater work for him to do than peddle pills. Wow. Here's a picture. This is a pretty blurry, not so clear picture, but yeah, that's about what he looked like. He was a little bit heavyset, yeah, and he liked to have his hair very similar to Brigham Young, kind of this, page boy style. Clean shaven, usually, anyway. At least the pictures I've seen of him. All right. But no sooner did he commence a settlement than he was smitten with a palsy, from which he had suffered exceedingly and was prevented executing his design until October 1836, when he arrived at Kirtland in company with his brother, Dr. Levi Richards, who attended him as physician. Well, they were doctors to each other, that's interesting. Where he was met most cordially and hospitably received and entertained by his cousin Brigham Young, with whom he tarried, and gave the work an unceasing and untiring investigation until December 31st, 1836, when he was baptized by Brigham Young at Kirtland. I forgot that he was related to him. It's interesting. I mean, he was related to a couple other people. Franklin D. Richards, I believe, was his nephew, if I'm not mistaken. I'll have to look that up later. And then, there's a couple other Richards, like LeGrand Richards was his great-great-nephew, something like that. Stephen L. Richards, I think that's right. Anyways, so he's related to all of them, just not necessarily directly. But he was also a cousin of Brigham Young. That's interesting. He was ordained an elder by Alva Beeman, March 6, 1837. A few days later, he left Kirtland on a mission to the eastern states, from which he returned June 11th. On the day following, he was blessed and set apart by the prophet Joseph to accompany Heber C. Kimball, Orson Hyde, and others on a mission to England. They started on the 13th, having arrived safely in England, and the gospel door having been successfully opened in Preston, Dr. Richards was sent to Bedford and surrounding country, where he labored with much success, notwithstanding bitter opposition. He returned to Preston in February 1838, and on April 1st attended a general conference, where he was ordained a high priest and appointed first counselor to Joseph Fielding, who was appointed to preside over the mission after Elders Kimball and Hyde returned to America. Elder Richards married Janetta Richards, daughter of Reverend John Richards, September 24, 1838. During the following year, he continued his missionary labors in Manchester, Bolton, Salford, Burslem, Preston, and other places. Okay, hang on a second. I believe that Janetta Richards was not related to him. I'm fairly certain that it was just a different branch of Richards. Richards is a fairly common last name. All they needed was an ancestor named Richard, who was fairly well known, to be called Richards. So, I'm fairly certain they were not related, but it is quite a funny coincidence that her maiden name was the same as his last name, so she didn't have to change her name when they got married. Dr. Richards was ordained one of the 12 apostles April 14, 1840, to which high and holy position he had been called by direct revelation, and after the publication of the Millennial Star was commenced, he assisted Parley P. Pratt in its editorial department, and also performed the general duties of presiding over the mission. In February 1841, he removed his family from Preston to Manchester, and in the following April left England with others of the 12 to return to Nauvoo, where he arrived August 16th. Agreeable to the Council of the 12, he located at Warsaw, Hancock County, Illinois, for a short time. He was elected a member of the City Council of Nauvoo October 30th, 1841, and removed to that city in December following. 2 days later, December 13th, he was appointed recorder for the temple, private secretary to Joseph Smith, and general church clerk. He commenced his labors in Joseph's new office in the brick store. From the time he entered Joseph's office, with the exception of a short mission to the east after his family, he was with Joseph until the prophet's death, continually at work with his pen while he was able to sit up. He was recorder of the city council and clerk of the municipal court, and kept Joseph Smith's private journals, making an entry only a few minutes previous to the awful tragedy at Carthage. And in the face of 100 muskets in the hands of an infuriated mobbers, he thrust his head out of the window to catch a glimpse of his dying president, and there remained, gazing intently upon the mangled body until he was satisfied that the innocent spirit had fled. His 2 minutes in jail is one of the most thrilling documents ever written, and his parrying muskets with a walking stick is one of the most unequal contests on record. God preserved him with the loss of a drop of blood and without a hole in his robe. I think they mean without the loss of a drop of blood, because he wasn't hurt, During the catastrophe of Joseph and Hiram's death and the emergency into which the church was suddenly thrown, Dr. Richards felt the burden of giving directions to the affairs of the church in Hancock County, in consequence of the absence of the 12 apostles. Though standing in the midst of the murderous mob at Carthage with the mangled bodies of his martyred friends and that of Elder Taylor under his charge, His letters and counsels at that time indicated great self-command and judgment. His ability was happily commensurate with such an occasion. At the time of the expulsion from Nauvoo, he acted as church historian, having been appointed to that position as early as December 1842. In the spring of 1847, he was enrolled in the memorable band of pioneers under President Young, and that first marked out a highway for the emigrating saints to Great Salt Lake Valley. After his return to winter quarters, he was elected second counselor to President Young, in which capacity he continued to act until his death. In the fall of 1848, he arrived in the valley a second time as captain of a large company of saints. As a civil officer, he served as secretary to the government of the state of Deseret, and did the greatest share of the business of the secretary of the territory of Utah after its organization as a territory, and presided over the council of the legislative assembly for about the same period. He was also postmaster of Great Salt Lake City up to the time of his death, and enjoyed the full confidence of the postmaster general, who respected his judgment touching the postal arrangements throughout the mountain territory. He was an efficient member of the Perpetual Emigrating Fund Company, whose duties affected the interest and gathering of tens of thousands. In the quorum of the first presidency, he magnified his high calling to the day of his death, ever shedding light and consolation in his sphere upon the minds of tens of thousands to whom he ministered. He was the editor and proprietor of the Deseret News, also general historian of the whole church, and church recorder, for which offices he was eminently gifted. He chronicled events, dates, circumstances, and incidents with a rare accuracy of judgment and great tenacity of memory. The number of offices which he held at the time of his death indicate the confidence which the church reposed in his great integrity and varied abilities. That ardent love of truth, the intuitive perception of the same, which impelled him to investigate the claims of the everlasting gospel in the beginning, grew with his passing years and became more and more manifest by his unwavering and unflinching adherence to it. In the most perilous and troublous times of the church history in the afterlife, he possessed a calm and even mind. He yet was rather reserved and naturally diffident of his own superior ability. This diffidency may have caused the early part of his ministry to be undervalued. From being familiar with the minutiae of the medical profession, and a careful observer of clerical deportment, and a handsome proficient in science generally, the change that swept over his past attainments and brought him down to the altar of revelation by the Holy Ghost showed forth the reality of a new birth personified in all his subsequent life. On great and rare occasions his masterly energies came forth like a well-disciplined and invincible troop that knew their place and prerogative to act in defense of the truth. Beloved and respected by all who knew him, Dr. Willard Richards died in Salt Lake City, March 11, 1854, from palsy, which disease had preyed upon his system ever since he began to investigate the Book of Mormon. For further details, see Millennial Star, Volume 27, page 118, Southern Star, Volume 2, page 353, etc. Okay, from palsy, they said, because I understood that it was from dropsy. So let's take a look. What in the world is palsy? What is palsy? Any of a variety of atonal muscular conditions characterized by tremors of the body parts as the hands, arms, or legs, or of the entire body. Okay, so he had tremors? Huh. So, okay, so does that mean that, or inability to use parts of his body, but he was able to walk, you know, I mean, he was physically capable to do things, so I don't think it was paralysis. It sounds more like maybe like Parkinson's? Alright, well, let's just go ahead and take a look at the Wikipedia article and see what they have to say, do a little fact checking. There was a few things in there that I wasn't as aware of, like his entire work with the church history, like the church historian, and I think I just forgot about that. I think I had heard it somewhere. Also, his work with the Perpetual Immigration Fund and things like that. I found that quite interesting. All right. Willard Richards, June 24th, 1804, so he was about the same age as Joseph Smith, yeah, to March 11th, 1854. So he lived until he was 50. Yes, he wasn't even quite 50, he was 49. See, like, that is not old. That is not old. was an early leader in the Latter-day Saint movement. He served as second counselor to Church President Brigham Young in the First Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS Church, from 1847 until his death. We said that. Early life. Willard Richards was born in Hopkinton, Massachusetts, to Joseph Richards and Rhoda Howe on June 24, 1804. He was the youngest of 11 children. Oh, wow. At age 4, he injured his head in a fall, which left with some residual muscle tremor and paralysis. Interesting. I wonder what was paralyzed then. Was it like a hand? Was it like, it wasn't his foot. Well, I guess he walked with a cane. I don't know. Maybe it was a foot. As a child, Richards was very inquisitive and would ask questions and read constantly. This was especially the case during the 6 months the local congregational minister resided in his parents' household. Because of his tendency to ask questions as to why things were the way they were, he was denied admission to the local congregational church. That's why he was denied admission. Well, they said, they thought that he was, had committed the unpardonable sin. I think they mean denying the Holy Ghost, because obviously he wasn't a murderer. Because he had asked so many questions. So he's like, oh, you're denying the Holy Ghost? No. That's not what that means. That's weird. As the injury limited his physical activity, he focused his attention on education and obtained a teacher's certificate at age 16. He taught school in Chatham, New York, and in Lanesboro, Massachusetts. In 1823, he moved to Nassau, New York. Richards pursued additional studies in physical mechanics and science and studied the clarinet. Oh, I didn't know that. He plays the clarinet. That's so cool. At age 27, he became an itinerant lecturer, traveling throughout New England, giving lectures on various scientific subjects. At the age of 30, after the death of his sister Susan, Richards decided to become a medical doctor. He studied at the Thompson Infirmary in Boston, focusing on medication and herbal preparations. He then settled in Holliston, Massachusetts, where he practiced medicine. Well, it sounds like he mostly, prescribed medication, yeah? In 1836, Richards was introduced to the newly published Book of Mormon by his cousins, Joseph and Brigham Young. Richards read the book twice within 10 days and made soon preparations to move to Kirtland, Ohio, to join the Church of the Latter-day Saints. A bout of palsy, however, prevented him from traveling until a year later. Okay, so it sounds like maybe it's like intermittent paralysis. That is a thing, where it can come and go. Like he's sometimes paralyzed and sometimes he's not. And he needs some physical therapy to get it going again. That's interesting, because I've heard of. There's a YouTuber I follow who has a condition called. Oh, it's something to do with pressure palsies, where she will sometimes get parts of her body paralyzed by just pushing on it, like having too much pressure on that specific spot, so she can have her arm go completely numb and not working just by resting her head on her arm on a desk. Yeah, things like that. It doesn't always happen, but it can happen, and I think that it might have been something semi-similar. I mean, it sounds like it might be. I don't know if it is, but they said that it was caused by a head injury. I mean, maybe he showed symptoms after that, but it might be unrelated, I don't know. It's just a question I'm throwing out there. I'm curious about medical things, so I don't know what kind of palsy this is. Anyway, Richards was baptized on December 31st, 1836 by Brigham Young and ordained an elder on March 6, 1837. Early church service. Shortly following his ordination as an elder, Richards was called on a brief 3-month mission to the eastern United States. Immediately upon his return, he was called on a more extended mission to Great Britain. This put him among the first missionaries of the LDS Church to go to Britain. Richards served a total of 4 years on his mission to Britain. He helped with the Millennial Stars publication. With his high level of education, Richards was often counseled by Heber C. Kimball to focus on the basic tenets of the gospel. It sounds like he's a bit ADHD, he wants to know everything. Richards was the moving force behind establishing the first branch of the church in Manchester, England. He was appointed first counselor to the president of the European Mission, Joseph Fielding. Marriage and family. Richards married Janetta Richards on September 24th, 1838, while on a 4-year mission to England. So she was British, yeah? Yeah, well, that would mean that they're definitely not that directly related since he was American. Their first child, named Heber John, was born on July 17th, 1839, but died of smallpox just 5 months later in October. That's really sad. They had 2 surviving children, a son also named Heber John, born in Manchester, England. Oh, that's so stupid. In 1840, and a daughter, Rhoda Ann Janetta, born in 1843 in Nauvoo, Illinois. Janetta Richards was in poor health after traveling across the Atlantic Ocean. In April 1841, Richards took her to live with his siblings in Richmond, Massachusetts, while he went on to Nauvoo, Illinois. I hate that they would name a child after their first child. Like, they really wanted to name a child Heber John, and then the child died at 5 months old, and so then the next child is also named Heber John. Like, that kind of pisses me off. I hate that. Dude, come up with a new name. This is a different child. You know? It's not a rebirth of the same child. It's a new child. Give the child a new name. I'm sorry, that's annoying. Pet peeve. Personal pet peeve. Richards was a close confidant of Joseph Smith and became a practitioner of polygamy. There is indication that his first plural wife was 26-year-old Nancy Marinda Johnson Hyde, who was already married to Orson Hyde. Hyde was away on a mission at the time. Okay, that's weird. Richards returned to Richmond and retrieved his wife Janetta, arriving back in Nauvoo November 21st, 1842. On January 18th, 1843, Richards married 16-year-old Sarah Longstreth and 14-year-old Nancy Longstreth, who were sisters. Joseph Smith officiated in the wedding. Richards married 11 wives in total. I wonder what the age of consent was back then. Like, honestly, because 14, that's young. That's really young. Okay, I can't specifically find it for Illinois, but here's what I found. Information on the ages used historically in Western age of consent laws is not readily available. This table has been compiled from a combination of historical and contemporary sources. By 1880, the first date chosen, many Western nations had established an age of consent for the first time, typically of 12 or 13 years old. By 1920, when the influence of reform campaigns had established a new link between the age of consent and prostitution had run its course, most had revised their age upward to 14 or 15 in European nations and 16 in the Anglo-American world. Okay, so back then, we're talking back in the day, in the U.S., it was, in Illinois, it was 10. In 1880, age of consent was 10, which was semi-typical, and that's horrifying, but that does mean that, Willard Richards was following age of consent for sure. Like, his youngest wife was 14, so, past age of consent and blah, blah, blah. Which is horrifying to us today, but it wasn't at the time. So, as horrified as I am at the moment, I have to check my culture and recognize that I did not live back then. And that that my standards are completely different than theirs. So that's part of looking at it with our modern eyes, yeah? And we look at it and we are horrified, but it was something that was okay at the time. Crazy. All right, Willard and Janetta Richards were sealed on May 29th, 1843, and were among the first couples to be sealed. After struggling with illness all her life, Janetta died on July 9th, 1845, at age 27. Jeez. Can you imagine dying that young? That's crazy. All right, apostle. Richards was ordained an apostle on April 14th, 1840 by Brigham Young. In 1841, he moved to Nauvoo, Illinois to be with the body of the church. He was in Warsaw, Illinois from September to December and did not take up residence in Nauvoo until December 1841. He was in Warsaw on a missionary assignment to found and supervise the settlement of church members there. Richards was a member of the Nauvoo City Council from 1841 to 1843. He was also a member of the Masonic Lodge at Nauvoo. In 1843, he was made recorder of the Nauvoo Municipal Court. He became Joseph Smith's private secretary in December 1841, when he was also made recorder of the Nauvoo Temple. In December 1842, Richards was called to be the church historian and recorder, a position he held until his death. In these two capacities, Richards maintained Smith's schedule and recorded most of his activities. As church historian, he subsequently wrote a total of 1,884 pages on the history of Smith. This is why I'm not making a video on Joseph Smith. There's way too much information. This work was later incorporated into the History of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, edited by B.H. Roberts. In July 1842, Richards went on a short mission to New England. In 1844, Richards was made the recorder of the Council of 50. On May 4, 1842, Richards was one of 9 men to whom Smith presented the endowment. That's quite an honor, yeah? Richards was incarcerated in Carthage jail with Joseph Smith, Hiram Smith, and John Taylor on June 27, 1844, when the jail was attacked by a mob and the Smiths were murdered. Taylor was shot 4 times and severely injured but survived the attack. Richards was unhurt and so supervised the removal of the bodies of Taylor and the Smiths. Over a year prior to the attack, Joseph Smith had told Richards that the time would come that the balls would fly around him like hail, and he should see his friends fall on the right and the left, but there should not be a hole in his garment. His first-hand account of the event was published in the Times and Seasons, yeah. He was the best able to give an account, yeah. Richards, his cousin Brigham Young, and other church elders left Nauvoo in February 1846, spending the remainder of the year at Winter Quarters, Nebraska. The first group entered into the Salt Lake Valley on July 24, 1847. Then they went back to Winter Quarters, arriving on August 21, 1847, to gather the families for the Mormon Exodus of 1848. Yep, they went back and forth several times, yeah. First Presidency. Richards was called as second counselor to Brigham Young in the First Presidency on December 27, 1847, in Council Bluffs, Iowa. After moving to Utah, Richards was involved in establishing the Deseret News, serving as its first editor-in-chief. In the provisional state of Deseret, Richards served as both secretary and president of the council. Once Utah was organized as a territory, he served as its secretary. He was also postmaster of Salt Lake City, and that was another one that surprised me, postmaster. Kind of random, yeah? Death and legacy. Richards died in Salt Lake City on March 11, 1854, and was buried in Salt Lake City Cemetery. He was 49 years old. He was described as calm and even-minded despite his physical challenges. Okay. Yeah. Other than the whole age of consent thing, which I still find disgusting, but hey, modern eyes, yeah? I think he was a really interesting person, and he seems to be very meticulous, fastidious, that he liked to write down details of things. So, I mean, what better person could have been a witness to the martyrdom, We needed someone who was able to report exactly what happened, and he did. And he did a really thorough and very good job. We know a lot about exactly how it happened. And the only thing he didn't know was how many people of the mob there were. But I think from his perspective, it would have been impossible to say. He couldn't tell how many people were outside. By the time he was able to look out the window to see if Joseph Smith was still alive, the mob had already gone, mostly. So he wasn't able to estimate it just by the sound of the people. So I understand that. But I'm really glad that he was able to be that witness and to possibly save John Taylor's life. So I think that we should definitely have an appreciation of Willard Richards and of him as a person and of all of the work that he did in his life. And that's why I'm making these videos, because I feel like a lot of these people are underappreciated, including Willard Richards. So I appreciate Willard Richards and all of the hard work that he did to preserve history, yeah? And if it weren't for him, I think in a lot of ways I wouldn't be able to do this work to the extent that I am. So, yeah, so thank you for paving the way, Willard Richards, yeah? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Is there anything that I missed? Also, if you did like the video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.